The rain hammered against the stained glass of the Harrington estate, but the storm inside the library was far more violent. Audrey stood alone in the center of the room, clutching her coat as laughter echoed off the mahogany walls. They thought they had won. They thought stripping her of her name, her dignity, and her home was the final nail in her coffin. But as the lawyer, Mr. Pendleton, slowly wiped his glasses and broke the seal on the second, smaller envelope, the laughter died instantly. What Silas Harrington left behind wasn't just money. It was a weapon, and Audrey was the only one who knew how to fire it. The funeral of Silas Harrington was the social event of the season in Charleston. It didn't matter that a man had died. What mattered was the redistribution of an empire. The Harrington Group controlled shipping, real estate, and half the local political board. To the hundreds of mourners in black designer silk and Italian wool, Silas wasn't a father or a husband. He was a vault that had finally cracked open. Audrey Miller stood at the very back of the procession, her heels sinking slightly into the soft, wet earth of the cemetery. She wasn't wearing designer silk. She wore a simple black dress she'd bought off the rack 3 years ago, the hem slightly frayed. She didn't have an umbrella, and the cold drizzle matted her dark hair against her cheeks, hiding the tears that the others refused to shed. "Look at her." A whisper drifted from the front row, carried by the wind. It was Sophia Harrington, Silas's youngest daughter. She was hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat that cost more than Audrey's car. She actually showed up, the audacity. "She's hoping for a crumb," Lucas Harrington, the eldest son, muttered back, adjusting his diamond cufflinks. She spent 5 years changing his bedpans and reading him the newspaper. She thinks that buys her a seat at the table. Audrey heard them. She always heard them. For 5 years, she had been the unseen ghost in Harrington Manor. When Silas's health began to fail, and his devoted children were too busy skiing in the Alps or closing deals in Tokyo to visit, it was Audrey, his late wife's daughter from a previous marriage, the unwanted stepchild, who had moved in. She had been the one to hold his hand through the seizures. She had been the one to drive him to chemotherapy at 4:00 a.m. She had been the one to listen to his regrets when the morphine made him lucid and terrified of the dark. But today, she wasn't family. She was an embarrassment. As the coffin was lowered, Beatrice Harrington, Silas's second wife and the matriarch of the family, turned her icy gaze toward Audrey. Beatrice was a woman made of steel and plastic surgery, her face a mask of practiced grief. She signaled to one of the security guards. A large man in a suit approached Audrey, blocking her view of the grave. "Ms. Miller," the guard said, his voice low but firm. "Mrs. Harrington has requested that the immediate family have privacy during the interment. You'll need to wait by the cars." Audrey looked at the hole in the ground where the only father figure she had ever known was disappearing. "I just want to say goodbye," she whispered, her voice trembling. "By the cars, Miss Miller," the guard repeated, stepping closer. Humiliation flushed her skin, hotter than the cold rain. Dozens of eyes turned to watch. Business rivals, senators, socialites. They watched the poor stepdaughter being ushered away like a stray dog that had wandered into a cathedral. Audrey didn't fight. She nodded, turning on her heel, and walked the long, lonely path back to the parking lot. She sat in her rusting sedan, watching the sleek limousines lined up like sharks waiting to feed. She waited because Mr. Pendleton, Silas's personal attorney, had called her explicitly. "You must be at the reading, Audrey. No matter what they say, you must be there." She gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. She didn't want their money. She didn't want their mansion. She just wanted them to acknowledge that she existed, that she had mattered to him. But as the procession ended and the black convoy began to move toward the estate, Audrey started her engine. She didn't know it yet, but the man she had nursed for 5 years hadn't just left a will. He had left a landmine, and she was the trigger. The library of Harrington Manor was a testament to old money. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes that no one read, a fireplace large enough to roast a whole pig, and a heavy oak desk where Silas had built his fortune. The atmosphere was festive, almost manic. Waiters circulated with crystal flutes of champagne. Beatrice sat on a velvet chaise lounge, looking more like a queen holding court than a grieving widow. Lucas was already on the phone with his broker, discussing liquidating assets he didn't technically own yet. Sophia was scrolling through Zillow, looking at penthouses in Manhattan. When Audrey walked in, the room went silent. The air pressure seemed to drop. A waiter paused, unsure if he should offer her a drink. He didn't. "I didn't realize the housekeeping staff was invited to the reading," Beatrice said, her voice sharp and clear. She took a sip of champagne, her eyes locking onto Audrey's wet coat. "You're dripping on the Persian rug, dear. It's an antique." "Mr. Pendleton asked me to come," Audrey said, keeping her chin up. She refused to cower. "Not today." "Pendleton is senile," Lucas sneered, snapping his phone shut. "Dad probably left you a stipend, a few thousand for your services. You could have waited in the kitchen for the check." "Actually," a gravelly voice cut through the insults. Arthur Pendleton stood in the doorway. He was a small man, withered by age, but his eyes were sharp, intelligent, and currently very angry. He carried a battered leather briefcase that looked out of place among the luxury. "Miss Miller will sit right there." He pointed to a high-backed leather chair directly across from the desk. It was Silas's favorite guest chair. Beatrice scoffed. "Don't be ridiculous, Arthur. That's for family." "I'm following the specific instructions of my client," Pendleton said, walking to the head of the room. He didn't sit. He placed the briefcase on the desk and unclasped the brass latches with a loud snap. "Everyone, take your seats. We have a lot to get through, and I suspect," he glanced at Lucas, "some of you have already spent money you do not have." Lucas flushed but sat down next to his mother. Sophia flopped onto a sofa, looking bored. "Let's get this over with," Beatrice said, checking her diamond watch. "I have a dinner reservation at Le Citron at 7. Pendleton pulled out a thick document. The last will and testament of Silas Edward Harrington. Being of sound mind and body. He droned through the legal preamble. The room was tense, the greed palpable. "To my loving wife, Beatrice," Pendleton read. Beatrice straightened, a triumphant smile touching her lips. "I leave the Harrington Manor, its contents, and the summer estate in the Hamptons." Beatrice let out a breath she had been holding. "Finally," she whispered. "I'm going to gut this horrible library first." "To my son, Lucas," Pendleton continued. "I leave my collection of vintage automobiles, the yacht Sea King, and a cash sum of $5 million. Lucas pumped a fist quietly. "Yes, the cars alone are worth 10. "To my daughter Sophia," Pendleton went on, "I leave the jewelry collection held in the downtown vault, excluding the sapphire pieces, and a cash sum of $5 million. Sophia squealed. "The diamonds! I knew it!" Audrey sat silently, her hands folded in her lap. She hadn't expected anything, and so far she was right. They were getting everything. The houses, the cars, the cash. It was exactly as the world expected. The rich got richer. And now, Pendleton paused, looking over his spectacles at the family, regarding the ownership of Harrington Industries. The room went deathly still. This was the big prize. The company was worth billions. The real estate and cash were peanuts compared to the controlling stake in the corporation. I, Silas Harrington, have watched my children grow, Pendleton read, his voice taking on a harder edge. I have watched them spend, I have watched them take, and I have watched them wait for me to die. Beatrice stiffened. Excuse me? Pendleton ignored her. I have realized, too late, that wealth does not build character. It rots it. My children do not know the cost of a gallon of milk, nor do they know the names of the men who sweep the floors of the buildings they wish to inherit. Lucas stood up. What is this? Is this some kind of lecture from the grave? Sit down, Lucas, Pendleton barked. The authority in his voice was shocking. Lucas sat, stunned. Therefore, Pendleton continued, I have made a decision regarding the future of my life's work. The controlling interest of Harrington Industries, 51% of all voting shares, is not bequeathed to Beatrice, Lucas, or Sophia. Then who? Beatrice shrieked, losing her composure. His brother is dead. There's no one else. Pendleton looked slowly toward the high-backed leather chair. To Audrey Miller, Pendleton read clearly, who sat with me when I had nothing left to offer but sickness, who never asked for a dime. I leave the controlling interest of Harrington Industries and the position of interim CEO effective immediately. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a bomb that had just landed but hadn't yet detonated. Audrey felt the blood drain from her face. She stared at the lawyer, unable to breathe. CEO? Majority owner? That's a lie, Lucas roared, jumping to his feet and overturning his chair. That's a fake. She's a waitress. She's a nobody. She can't run $1 billion company. She's a gold-digging snake, Beatrice screamed, her face contorted with rage. She pointed a manicured finger at Audrey. You manipulated him. You drugged him. I'll sue you. I'll bury you. It is ironclad, Pendleton said calmly. Silas underwent 3 separate psychiatric evaluations to prove his competency specifically for this moment. You can sue, Beatrice, but you will lose. And might I remind you, the cash bequests mentioned earlier are contingent on a non-contest clause. If you challenge the will, you lose the $5 million and the house. Beatrice fell back onto the chaise, clutching her chest. Sophia was staring at Audrey with open-mouthed horror. Audrey finally found her voice. Mr. Pendleton, I don't know anything about running a company. Silas knew that, Pendleton said, his eyes softening. He left you a letter and a team of advisors. He believed in your heart, Audrey. He said you were the only one who had a moral compass. This isn't over, Lucas hissed, leaning across the gap between them, his face inches from Audrey's. Spittle flew from his lips. You think you can walk in here and take my birthright? You're trash, Audrey. I will destroy you. I will make sure you're begging on the street within a month. Audrey looked at Lucas. For years, his anger had terrified her. But looking at him now, seeing the fear behind his eyes, she felt something new. I'm not the maid anymore, Lucas, Audrey said, her voice quiet but steady. I'm your boss. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. By the next morning, the story was on the front page of every financial newspaper. Maid to billionaire. Harrington estate shock. The paparazzi were camped at the bottom of the driveway of the small apartment Audrey rented. But Audrey wasn't at her apartment. Mr. Pendleton had advised her to stay at a secure hotel downtown, the St. Regis, under an assumed name. Sitting in the penthouse suite that the company now paid for, Audrey looked at the stacks of documents on the table. It was overwhelming. Financial reports, board meeting minutes, personnel files. You don't have to do everything today, Pendleton said, pouring her a cup of tea. The board of directors is in shock. They've called an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning. They are going to try to remove you. Can they? Audrey asked. They can try to vote you out as CEO, Pendleton explained. But they can't take your shares. You own the company. If they fire you, you can fire the board. It's a standoff. But they will try to intimidate you. They will try to make you feel small, stupid, and incapable. They want you to sell your shares to Lucas and walk away. Lucas called me 3 times this morning, Audrey said, glancing at her phone. Don't answer, Pendleton warned. He's desperate. He has gambling debts, Audrey. Deep ones. That's why Silas cut him off. He owes money to people you don't want to meet. He needs that company to pay them back. Audrey felt a chill. She knew Lucas was reckless, but she didn't know he was dangerous. The next morning, Audrey walked into the Harrington Industries skyscraper. She wore a new navy blue suit Pendleton had ordered for her. It was sharp, professional armor. She took the elevator to the top floor. When she entered the boardroom, 12 men in grey suits stopped talking. At the head of the table sat Marcus Sterling, the CFO. He was a close friend of Lucas. Ms. Miller, Sterling said, not standing up. You're late. The meeting starts at 9, Audrey said, checking the clock. It is 8:58. We've been here since 8, Sterling replied coldly. Discussing the crisis management required to save this company's stock price from your reputation. My reputation? Audrey walked to the head of the table. Sterling was sitting in the CEO's chair. He didn't move. Excuse me, Audrey said. You're in my seat. Sterling smirked. This seat is for the CEO, Ms. Miller. The board has prepared a severance package for you. We are prepared to offer you $10 million for your shares. It's a generous offer. Take it, go buy a nice island, and let the adults work. He slid a check across the polished wood. It was made out to Audrey Miller. 10,000. It was more money than she could ever spend. It was freedom. It was safety. But then she remembered the night Silas died. He had grabbed her hand, his grip weak but urgent. Don't let them strip it for parts, Audrey. They'll fire the workers. They'll sell the pensions, protect the people. Audrey looked at the check. Then she looked at Sterling. $10 million, Audrey said thoughtfully. It's a lot of money for a girl with no college degree, Sterling said, his tone dripping with condescension. Audrey picked up the check. The room held its breath. She slowly tore it in half, then in quarters. She dropped the confetti onto the table. Get out of my chair, Audrey said. Sterling's face turned purple. You listen to me, you little... No, you listen to me, Audrey interrupted, her voice gaining strength. I own 51% of this table, this building and that chair. If you don't move in 3 seconds, I will have security remove you, and I will accept your resignation, effective immediately. Sterling stared at her, stunned by the steel in her voice. He looked around the table. The other board members looked down, unwilling to cross the majority shareholder. Slowly, furiously, Sterling stood up and moved to a side chair. Audrey sat down. The leather was still warm. She looked out at the sea of hostile faces. Now, she said, placing her hands on the table. Let's look at the books, specifically the consulting fees paid to Lucas Harrington over the last 5 years. The color drained from Sterling's face. I don't know what you're talking about, he stammered. I think you do, Audrey said. She pulled a folder from her bag, the second thing Silas had given her, days before he died. Silas couldn't prove it because he was too sick to track the paper trail. But I wasn't. While you all thought I was just the nurse, I was organizing his files. I know about the shell company in the Cayman Islands. I know about Project Chimera. The room went dead silent. We have a lot of work to do, Audrey said. And if anyone here is leaking information to Lucas or Beatrice, I will find out, and I will prosecute. She had survived the funeral. She had survived the will reading. But as she looked at Sterling's hateful eyes, she knew the war had just begun. And outside the glass walls, a storm was brewing that would make the previous rain look like a drizzle. Beatrice wasn't just going to sue. She was going to play dirty. And just as the meeting adjourned, Audrey's phone buzzed, an unknown number. She answered. "Hello?" "You think you're smart," a distorted voice whispered. "But we know about your mother, Audrey. We know where she is. Resign or we pay her a visit." The line went dead. Audrey froze. Her mother had been in a state-run care facility for dementia for 10 years. No one in the Harrington family knew she existed. They had found her. The drive to the Shady Oaks Memory Care Center was a blur of terrified adrenaline. Audrey's hands shook so violently on the steering wheel that she had to pull over twice just to breathe. The threatening call had been specific. "We know where she is." For 10 years, Audrey had protected her mother. Martha. Martha had been the housekeeper for the Harrington estate before her mind began to fracture, dissolving into the fog of early-onset dementia. Silas Harrington, in a rare moment of quiet kindness that he hid from his vulture-like family, had paid for Martha's care privately. He had set it up through shell accounts so Beatrice would never find out. Beatrice hated Martha. She had always suspected that Silas held a soft spot for the gentle housekeeper, perhaps even loved her in a way he never loved his cold, socialite wife. If Beatrice or Lucas had found Martha, they would use her. They would hurt her to break Audrey. Audrey skidded her car into the parking lot of the facility. It was a modest brick building on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by oak trees that looked menacing in the twilight. She sprinted to the front desk. "Martha Miller," she gasped, her chest heaving. "Room 304. Is she okay?" The receptionist, a kindly woman named Mrs. Higgins, who knew Audrey well, looked up with a confused smile. "Why, yes, dear. She's having a lovely time with her visitor." Audrey's blood turned to ice. "Visitor? My mother doesn't have visitors. Only me." "A charming woman," Mrs. Higgins said, glancing at the sign-in book. "She said she was an old friend from the Harrington estate. Brought flowers." Audrey didn't wait. She ran down the hallway, the smell of antiseptic and lavender choking her. She burst into room 304. The scene before her made her nausea spike. Martha was sitting in her wheelchair by the window, staring blankly at the rain, and sitting next to her, holding a cup of tea with practiced elegance, was Beatrice Harrington. Beatrice looked up as the door slammed open. She didn't jump. She smiled, a slow, reptilian stretching of red lips. "Audrey," Beatrice purred. "We were just reminiscing. Although poor Martha here doesn't seem to remember much about the silver polish incident of 1998. Pity." "Get away from her," Audrey snarled, stepping into the room. She felt a primal protectiveness, a rage she didn't know she possessed. "If you touch her—" "Relax, dear. I'm just paying my respects." Beatrice stood up, brushing imaginary lint from her Chanel suit. She walked over to Martha and placed a hand on the frail woman's shoulder. Martha didn't react. "She looks expensive to keep," Beatrice mused, looking around the room. "Private room, 24-hour care. Silas was paying for this, wasn't he? Using my money to keep his hired help comfortable." "It wasn't your money," Audrey said, her voice shaking. "It was his, and now it's mine." Beatrice's eyes flashed with danger. She took a step closer to Audrey, invading her personal space. The scent of expensive perfume was overpowering. "You think you've won, little girl," Beatrice whispered. "You think because a senile old man signed a paper, you're safe? Look at your mother. She's helpless, vulnerable. Accidents happen in places like this. Pills get mixed up. Patients wander off. Audrey grabbed Beatrice's wrist. It was an impulsive move, shocking them both. Beatrice gasped, trying to pull away, but Audrey held on. "Listen to me," Audrey said, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly low register. "You want a war? Fine, we'll have a war. But if a single hair on her head is harmed, if she even catches a cold, I will liquidate every asset you have. I will burn the Harrington legacy to the ground and leave you destitute. I own the company, Beatrice. I own the house you sleep in. Do not test me." Beatrice yanked her arm free, rubbing her wrist with a look of pure loathing. "You're hurting me." "Get out," Audrey pointed to the door. "And if I see you here again, I'll have you arrested for trespassing and harassment." Beatrice straightened her jacket. She regained her composure, though her face was pale. "Enjoy your victory lap, Audrey. But remember, Silas had secrets, dark ones, and you're not the only one who knows where the bodies are buried." Beatrice swept out of the room, her heels clicking like gunshots down the hallway. Audrey collapsed onto the bed next to her mother, trembling. She took Martha's hand. "Audrey?" Martha's voice was thin, confused. She looked at her daughter with a flicker of recognition. Did the bad lady leave?" Audrey choked back a sob. "Yes, Mum, she's gone. I won't let her come back." But she knew she couldn't guarantee that. Not alone. She pulled out her phone and dialed the number Pendleton had given her. It was a direct line to the head of Harrington Security, a man Silas had trusted implicitly. "This is Garrison," a deep, gravelly voice answered. "Mr. Garrison, this is Audrey Miller. I need a security detail at Shady Oaks Memory Care immediately, and I need a team to move my mother to a secure location tonight." "I'm already on my way, Miss Miller," Garrison replied instantly. "Mr. Pendleton anticipated this. We have a safe house ready. Beatrice won't get near her again." Audrey hung up, feeling the weight of her new reality. She wasn't just a CEO. She was a target. And to survive, she had to stop playing defense. She had to attack. 2 days later, the atmosphere at Harrington Industries was toxic. Audrey walked through the glass doors of the headquarters, flanked by Garrison, a towering man with a scar running through his eyebrow, and a silence that was more intimidating than any weapon. The lobby was chaotic. Phones were ringing off the hook, and staff were huddled in corners, whispering. When they saw Audrey, they scattered. She reached the executive floor. Pendleton was waiting for her outside her office, looking frazzled. "It's bad, Audrey," Pendleton said, skipping the pleasantries. "The transport division is threatening to strike. Someone leaked a memo saying that the new management plans to cut pensions by 40% and lay off half the dock workers." "What?" Audrey was shocked. "I never authorized that. I explicitly told the board we were protecting pensions." "I know that, and you know that," Pendleton said, handing her a tablet. "But they don't. Look at this." On the screen was a forged email, sent from Audrey, millerharringtonin.com. It detailed a ruthless plan to gut the workforce to maximize short-term profits. It looked authentic. "Lucas," Audrey whispered. "He has the IT passwords. He probably still has back doors into the system. The union leader, Mike O'Connell, is downstairs in the lobby," Pendleton said. "He's furious. He's talking about shutting down the entire East Coast shipping operation by noon. If that happens, the stock price crashes, and the board will have grounds to remove you for incompetence." "That's the plan," Audrey realized. "They want me to fail fast." She looked at Garrison. "Take me to the lobby." "Audrey, wait," Pendleton warned. "O'Connell is a tough guy. He's not going to listen to reason." "Send a representative." "No." Audrey straightened her blazer. "Silas always said, If you want to kill a snake, you have to look it in the eye. I'm going down there." The lobby was a scene of near riot. Dozens of burly dock workers in high-visibility vests were shouting at the terrified receptionists. In the center stood Mike O'Connell, a man built like a vending machine with a red face and fists the size of hams. "Where is she?" O'Connell bellowed. "Where is the little princess who wants to starve our families?" "I'm right here," Audrey's voice rang out. The shouting died down. The sea of vests parted as Audrey walked toward O'Connell. She looked tiny compared to him, but she didn't flinch. O'Connell sneered. "Well, look at this. You come down from your ivory tower to fire us in person. I came down here to tell you that memo is a lie," Audrey said loudly, so everyone could hear. "I never wrote it. It's a forgery created by Lucas Harrington to bankrupt this company so he can buy it back for pennies." "Why should I believe you?" O'Connell spat. "You're one of them now." "I am not one of them." Audrey stepped closer. "My mother was a housekeeper. I grew up waiting for the bus, not a limo. I know that pension fund is the only thing keeping your family secure. And I know that Silas Harrington promised you a 5% raise last year that never materialized because Sterling, the CFO, claimed there wasn't enough budget." O'Connell paused, surprised. "How do you know about the raise?" "Because I was the one who typed Silas's notes," Audrey said. "I know where the money went. It didn't go to the budget. It went to a consulting firm owned by Lucas Harrington called Apex Solutions. He stole your raise, Mr. O'Connell." A murmur went through the crowd. "You can strike," Audrey continued, her voice rising. "You can shut us down. And if you do, the stock crashes, Lucas takes over, and he will gut your pensions. Or you can give me 1 week. 1 week to prove it. If I don't find the money and put it back in your accounts by Friday, I will resign and personally sign over my severance to the union fund." The room was silent. O'Connell stared at her, searching for the lie. He saw only desperate sincerity. "1 week," O'Connell grunted. "But if you're lying, girl, I won't just strike. I'll burn this place down." "Deal." Audrey extended her hand. O'Connell hesitated, then shook it. His grip was crushing, but she held firm. As the workers dispersed, Audrey felt her knees go weak. Garrison caught her elbow to steady her. "Nice work," Garrison murmured. "But now you have a clock ticking. You promised them money we don't technically have access to yet." "We have access to it," Audrey said, her eyes hardening. "We just have to take it back from Lucas." She went back upstairs, adrenaline pumping. She marched into her office and slammed the door. "Pendleton, get the forensic accountants. We are tearing Lucas's shell companies apart. Tonight." But as she sat at Silas's desk, she noticed something. The bottom drawer, usually locked, was slightly ajar. She pulled it open. It was empty. Silas kept a small black ledger there. He had shown it to her once, in a delirium. The insurance policy, he had called it. "If they ever try to kill me, Audrey, the book tells the story." The book was gone. Someone had been in her office. Her computer screen flickered. A message box popped up. Black text on a green background. "You're good with the workers, Audrey, but you're bad with security. We have the book. We have the proof. Come to the gala on Saturday, alone, or we release the pages that show Silas wasn't a saint. He was a monster." Audrey stared at the screen. The Project Chimera file she had mentioned to Sterling. She thought it was just financial fraud. But if Silas called it an insurance policy against being killed, it was something much darker. Lucas didn't just want the money. He wanted to bury the truth about what the Harrington family really did to make their billions. Saturday night arrived with a storm of camera flashes. The annual Harrington Charity Gala was held at the city's museum, a cavernous hall filled with dinosaur bones and ancient artifacts, fitting company for the dinosaurs of the business world who attended. Audrey wore a dress that was a weapon in itself, a blood-red silk gown that stood out violently against the sea of black tuxedos. She wore her hair pulled back tight, no jewelry, just resolve. She walked the red carpet alone. The reporters shouted questions. Is it true the company is under investigation? Are you stepping down? Is there a romance with the union leader? She ignored them all. Inside, the ballroom was suffocating. Beatrice held court near the champagne fountain, looking revitalized. Lucas was laughing with a group of senators. When they saw Audrey, the laughter stopped. Lucas detached himself from the group and walked over to her. He looked different, sweaty, manic, his eyes dilated. You came. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I thought you'd be running for the hills. I want the book, Lucas, Audrey said calmly. And I want the resignation letters from you and Sterling. Lucas laughed, a harsh, barking sound. You don't get to make demands, Cinderella. Not tonight. Tonight is about the transition. What transition? The transition back to natural order. Lucas leaned in, smelling of whiskey and desperation. In 20 minutes, I'm going to make a speech. I'm going to present the board with evidence that Silas was suffering from severe mental decline when he changed his will. Evidence provided by his nurse. Audrey frowned. I never provided any evidence. Oh, but you did, Lucas tapped his pocket. We have recordings, Audrey. Deepfakes are amazing these days, aren't they? A few clips of your voice, some AI magic, and suddenly we have you admitting that you coerced a dying man. We're going to play it for the whole room. You'll be arrested for fraud before dessert is served. Audrey felt the blood drain from her face. A deepfake. It was impossible to disprove instantly. By the time the experts analyzed it, the damage would be done. The stock would plummet, the board would fire her, and she would be in jail. You're sick, she whispered. I'm a businessman, Lucas sneered. Now smile. The cameras are watching. He walked away, stepping onto the stage at the front of the room. The lights dimmed. A spotlight hit him. Ladies and gentlemen, Lucas announced, his voice booming over the speakers. Thank you for coming. Tonight is a difficult night. We mourn my father, but we also must protect his legacy from those who would exploit it. He gestured to the massive screen behind him. I have discovered a tragic truth. The woman my father trusted betrayed him. The crowd gasped. Beatrice looked at Audrey with a look of pure triumph. Audrey looked around frantically. Where was Garrison? He was supposed to be by the exit. He was gone. Had they paid him off? Was she truly alone? On the screen, a video began to play. It showed Audrey, or a digital puppet that looked exactly like her, sitting in a chair. The digital Audrey spoke. He's losing his mind. I can get him to sign anything. I just need to switch the medication. The room erupted in murmurs of shock. Murderous! Someone shouted. Audrey stood frozen. It was over. They had won. But then, the audio on the screen glitched. The video stuttered and froze. The screen went black. Technical difficulties? Lucas laughed nervously. One moment. Suddenly, the screen flared to life again. But it wasn't the fake Audrey. It was a grainy, handheld video. The angle was low, hidden. It was recorded from a phone tucked into a pocket. The voice on the video was unmistakable. It was Lucas. Video Lucas. I don't care if the EPA finds the waste, Sterling. Dump it in the marsh. If the locals get sick, we pay them off. Just like we did with the dad's mechanic, who knew too much about the brake lines. Video Sterling. And Silas? He's asking questions about the Cayman accounts. Video Lucas. Dad won't be a problem much longer. I switched his heart medication for sugar pills weeks ago. Nature will take its course. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. It was heavy, suffocating silence. Real Lucas stood on stage, his face turning a ghostly white. He looked at the screen, then at the tech booth. In the tech booth, standing over the sound engineer, was Garrison. And next to him was a young teenager in a hoodie, a hacker Audrey had bailed out of trouble years ago, a kid she used to babysit. Audrey hadn't come alone, and she hadn't come for the book. She knew they had destroyed the book. She had come to play the one card they didn't think she had. Silas hadn't just left a physical book. He had left a digital cloud backup, and the password was the one thing only Audrey knew, the name of the stray dog they had rescued together. On the stage, Lucas began to tremble. "Turn it off! It's a lie! It's AI!" But the video continued. It showed Lucas handing a thick envelope of cash to a man in a leather jacket. "Make sure the brakes fail on the curve," Lucas said on screen. Audrey walked toward the stage. The crowd parted for her like the Red Sea, but this time it wasn't in mockery. It was in fear. "That wasn't a deep fake, Lucas," Audrey said, her voice clear in the silent room. "That was dated October 14th, the day your father's car went off the road. The accident he survived, only to die of heart failure 2 months later." You, Lucas stammered, backing away. "You didn't just steal the company," Audrey said, tears finally spilling from her eyes. "You killed him. You killed your own father." "Arrest her!" Beatrice screamed from the floor, hysterical. "She's lying." But the doors to the ballroom burst open. It wasn't the waiters. It was the FBI. "Lucas Harrington, Beatrice Harrington, Marcus Sterling," a lead agent shouted, holding up a badge. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, and racketeering." Lucas looked at the agents, then at Audrey. The arrogance was gone. In its place was the feral look of a trapped animal. He reached into his tuxedo jacket. "He has a gun!" someone screamed. Chaos erupted. People dove under tables. Lucas pulled out a silver pistol, but he didn't aim it at the police. He aimed it at Audrey. "If I go down," Lucas screamed, his eyes wild, "I'm taking the trash with me." Bang! The shot echoed through the museum hall, deafening and final. Audrey flinched, closing her eyes, waiting for the pain. But it didn't come. She opened her eyes. Garrison had leapt from the balcony of the tech booth. He lay on the floor in front of her, groaning, clutching his shoulder where blood was blossoming like a dark red flower on his white shirt. He had taken the bullet. The FBI agents tackled Lucas, pinning him to the ground as he screamed obscenities. Beatrice was being handcuffed, weeping not for her son, but for the humiliation. Audrey dropped to her knees beside Garrison. "Garrison!" "Oh, God. I'm okay," the big man grunted, his face pale. "Just a scratch. Silas? Silas told me to look out for you." Audrey held his hand as the paramedics rushed in. She looked up at the stage where Lucas was being dragged away. She looked at the screen where the image of Silas Harrington was frozen, smiling. The war was over. The truth was out. But as Audrey looked around the shattered room, she realized the cost of the truth. Her family was gone, even the bad ones. Her anonymity was gone. She was the sole heir to a broken empire, surrounded by enemies who hadn't been caught yet, and the only man she trusted was bleeding on the floor. She was the CEO of Harrington Industries, and she had never felt more alone. The silence of the hospital waiting room was a stark contrast to the chaos of the museum. For 3 days, Audrey had barely left the plastic chair outside the intensive care unit. The news played on a muted television mounted in the corner, cycling through the same footage. Lucas being shoved into a police cruiser, Beatrice hiding her face with a designer bag, and the blurry clip of the shooting. The headlines had shifted. They no longer called her a gold digger. Now they called her the Iron Heiress. The stock of Harrington Industries had plummeted 30% in the first 24 hours, only to rebound and surge higher than ever before as the public realized the rot had been cut out. The door to the ICU opened. A doctor in tired scrubs stepped out. "Ms. Miller?" Audrey stood up, her legs stiff. "How is he?" "He's awake." The doctor smiled tiredly. "The bullet missed the artery and the bone. He's a very lucky man, or a very tough one. He's asking for you." Audrey let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in her lungs for a week. She walked into the room. Garrison looked smaller in the hospital bed, hooked up to monitors, but his eyes were clear. "You look terrible, boss," he rasped, his voice rough. "You got shot," Audrey said, pulling a chair close to the bed. Tears pricked her eyes. "You took a bullet for me, Garrison. Why?" "Silas," Garrison said, looking at the ceiling. "Years ago, I was in a bad spot. Gambling debts. Bad crowd. Lucas tried to pay me to look the other way on some shipments. I almost took it. Silas found out. He didn't fire me. He paid my debts. He gave me a second chance. He made me promise that if anything ever happened to him, I'd watch over the one person in this family who actually had a heart." He looked at Audrey. "I was just doing my job." "You're retired," Audrey said firmly, "effective immediately, with full pension and a bonus that will let you buy that fishing boat you talk about." "I'm not leaving you," Garrison argued weakly. "The wolves are gone, but there are always coyotes." "You can be my consultant," Audrey smiled, patting his hand, "from the boat, via satellite phone." Leaving the hospital, Audrey felt a shift in the air. The fear that had driven her for weeks was gone. In its place was a heavy, cold sense of responsibility. She wasn't fighting for survival anymore. She was fighting for a legacy. She had her driver take her to the Harrington Manor. The police tape had finally been removed. The house, usually so imposing and dark, looked different today. The windows were open. The staff, who had lived in fear of Beatrice's wrath for decades, were moving with a lighter step. In the driveway, a red convertible was parked. A young woman was sitting on the hood, smoking a cigarette, looking at the house with a mix of longing and resentment. It was Sophia. Audrey stepped out of the car. She told her security detail to hang back. She walked up the gravel drive. Sophia looked up. She looked unkempt. Her hair wasn't done, and she was wearing jeans, something Audrey had never seen her do. "They denied bail," Sophia said, her voice flat. "Mum and Lucas. They're going to be in holding until the trial. The lawyers say Lucas is looking at 20 to life. Mum, maybe 10 for conspiracy." "I know," Audrey said softly. "I didn't know," Sophia said, flicking the cigarette onto the pristine lawn. She looked at Audrey, her eyes red-rimmed. "You have to believe me, Audrey. I'm a brat. I'm greedy. I wanted the diamonds. But I didn't know they killed Dad. I didn't know they were dumping chemicals." Audrey studied her stepsister. She believed her. Sophia was too vapid, too self-absorbed to be part of a complex murder plot. She was collateral damage. "I believe you," Audrey said. "They froze my accounts." Sophia laughed bitterly. "Everything is tied up in the RICO investigation. I have $12 in my purse. I have nowhere to go." She looked at the mansion. Can I come inside?" Audrey looked at the house. It was big enough for an army. But she remembered the years of snide comments. The way Sophia used to laugh when Beatrice made Audrey scrub the floors on Christmas Eve. No, Audrey said. Sophia flinched as if she'd been slapped. What? But I'm your sister. You're my stepsister, Audrey corrected. And for 5 years you treated me like furniture. You watched them abuse me and you laughed because it made you feel superior. Sophia crumbled, sliding off the hood of the car. Please, I have nothing. You have your freedom, Audrey said, which is more than Lucas or Beatrice have. Audrey reached into her bag and pulled out a checkbook. She wrote a check and tore it out. This is $50,000, Audrey handed it to her. It's enough to rent an apartment, buy some clothes and find a job. A job? Sophia stared at the check, horrified. I don't know how to do anything. Then you'd better learn, Audrey said, her voice hard but not cruel. Silas started with nothing. I started with nothing. You're young, Sophia. Figure it out. But you aren't living here. This house needs to be cleansed of the toxicity. And you're part of that. Sophia held the check, her hands trembling. She looked at Audrey with hatred, then with respect, and finally, with resignation. She got into her convertible, started the engine, and drove away. Audrey watched her go. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. But she knew it was right. You couldn't build a new future if you kept inviting the past back in to sleep on the couch. The next morning, Audrey walked into the boardroom of Harrington Industries. The room was full, but the faces were different. The cronies were gone, fired in a mass purge the day after the arrests. In their place were the heads of the departments, engineering, logistics, HR. People who actually did the work. And at the end of the table sat Mike O'Connell, the union leader. Miss Miller. O'Connell nodded respectfully as she entered. Mr. O'Connell. Audrey took her seat at the head of the table. She placed a thick binder on the wood. I promised you a week. I did it in 4 days. She opened the binder. We recovered $40 million from the Cayman shell accounts. The FBI has released the funds back to the company as part of a restitution agreement. The pension fund is fully solvent as of this morning, and the 5% raise is retroactive to last year. O'Connell picked up the documents, reading them over. He looked up, a rare smile cracking his rugged face. You don't mess around, do you? I don't have time to mess around, Audrey said. We have a reputation to rebuild. I want to launch a new initiative. The Silas Standard. We are going to double our safety protocols. We are going to clean up the dumping sites Lucas created. And we are going to pay for the medical bills of anyone affected in those areas. It's going to cost us a fortune. We won't turn a profit for 2 years. The room murmured nervously. But, Audrey continued, leaning forward, when we come out of it, we will be the most trusted shipping company on the planet. Are you with me? She looked around the table. One by one, the department heads nodded. They were tired of the corruption, too. They wanted to be proud of where they worked. We're with you, O'Connell said. The strike is off. Let's get to work. That evening, as the sun set over the city, casting long purple shadows across the estate, Audrey sat on the terrace of the manor. The French doors opened, and a nurse wheeled Martha out. Martha looked better. The stress of the facility was gone. She was wearing a soft cardigan, and her hair was brushed and silver in the light. Look at the garden, Mum, Audrey said, kneeling beside the wheelchair. The roses are blooming. Martha looked at the garden. Her eyes, usually so cloudy, seemed to focus on the statue of the angel in the center of the fountain. Silas loved those roses, Martha whispered. Audrey froze. Yes, he did. He was a good man, Martha said, her voice surprisingly strong. He was so lonely. All that money. And so lonely. She looked at Audrey. He loved you, you know. He used to tell me. Martha, that girl has fire in her belly, She's the daughter I should have had." Tears streamed down Audrey's face. She laid her head on her mother's lap. "I miss him, Mum." "He's here." Martha patted her hair. "He's in the roses, he's in the bricks, and he's in you." Martha's clarity faded as quickly as it had come. She pointed at a bird. "Look, a blue one." Audrey wiped her face and stood up. She looked out over the estate. She owned it all. The land, the company, the power. But standing there with her mother, safe and sound, she realized she had something much more valuable. She had her dignity. She had the truth. She walked to the edge of the terrace and looked down the long driveway where, weeks ago, she had driven away in a rusted sedan, humiliated and rejected. She took out her phone. She had one last call to make. "Pendleton," she said when the lawyer answered. "Yes, Miss Miller?" "Change the name," Audrey said. "I don't want it to be Harrington Industries anymore." "What did you have in mind?" Audrey smiled. "Miller Harrington. Let them know that the help didn't just inherit the company. We saved it." She hung up and breathed in the cool night air. The storm was over. The reign of the Queen had begun. The story of Audrey Miller reminds us that true power isn't about the money in your bank account or the last name you were born with. It's about the content of your character. Lucas and Beatrice had everything the world says you need to be happy, but their greed and arrogance became their prison. Audrey had nothing but her integrity, and it became her crown. It's a powerful lesson. When you are underestimated, don't get angry. Get smart. The truth has a way of coming out, and karma always keeps the receipts. What would you have done in Audrey's shoes? Would you have forgiven Sophia, or would you have slammed the door in her face? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption, please hit that like button, share it with a friend who loves a good drama, and don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story.